Thanks for listening to this message from Fusion. You can find more messages at fusionbc.com.
So I want to speak about blessing. If we look at Webster's definition of blessing, it says a special favor, mercy, or benefit. The second one is a favor or gift bestowed by God, thereby bringing happiness. And I want us to turn to Genesis chapter 27. Not sure if we can put it up on the screen, but this story is a fairly long story, so I won't read the whole chapter. But this is the story where Isaac, one of the forefathers, we could say one of the patriarchs, he became old, and he saw that his time on earth was almost over. So he wanted to, we could say, he wanted to pass on what good he had while he was still alive. So he calls up his oldest son, and the tradition back then was that the oldest son received a special portion of blessing and inheritance. So he calls Esau, and he says to Esau, go and find that special dish that I want. You need to go out and hunt and bring me of the hunt and prepare that special meal. And I'm sure they had good meals like that before, so Esau knew what he was referring to. So Rebekah, Isaac's wife, heard that behind the door, we could say, and she told Jacob, the younger brother, you go and do the same. You just find yourself a lamb or a goat, and bring the goats, and I will prepare it, and I will make sure this passes. So both of them go out. Esau goes out to hunt, and Jacob just has a little ways to go. He just goes to the flock, and he picks 2 goats and brings it to his mother. And his mother prepares the meal. She had to disguise Jacob heavily because Jacob was fair-skinned or smooth, and Esau was a rough redneck out in the bushes usually. So also the clothing, she had to put on Esau's clothing because they had the smell of, who knows, maybe campfire smell or something to it that Isaac, the dad, would know that this is for sure the one, because Isaac was becoming nearsighted, or he was becoming blind. Anyway, long story short, both come back, and Jacob beats the race. He comes in before Esau. And he has to lie a few times for it to pass, but he assures his dad, yes, it's me, I'm Esau, and his dad blesses him, a very thorough, deep blessing upon his son, thinking all the time it's Esau. And the very interesting thing is, once Esau comes back, we can see what significance this blessing had. There was only one, and that had been given. There was no 2 copies that he could say, well, let's just also bless you with the same. He only had one blessing to give, and he gave that to Jacob, and it was sealed. He could not revoke it. Now we see how Esau's response, he was very terrified and very let down. He goes out and he cries bitterly, because he sees that his whole future, not just his future, but generation to generation has been changed. And to make matters worse, Isaac says, and your sons will become servants to Jacob. So it wasn't really a curse, but it was a prophecy, a negative prophecy in the future, that Esau's sons would serve Jacob and his family. So the blessing is a huge thing. And I'm sure if I would go down the rows here, I would ask each of you, if you have a specific time in life when it was important to you, you will all say yes. Certain times in life, somebody initiates you, somebody says that word of affirmation, and you just keep going on that word. So now, there's a few types of blessings. There's the unspoken, which is in our hearts. This is what we think about other people. When we think about individuals, we either bless them or we curse them or judge them, right? We don't say it, but we know it inside of us. We have that feeling towards others. Then there's a type of laying on of hands, which we sometimes do special prayers. Then there's the warfare type, which is blessing your enemy. That doesn't come naturally for sure. If we have somebody that hates us, we don't like to bless them, but we need to. Then there's also the type when a dad prays for his wife, or I should say the husband prays for the wife, or also to the children, family member initiation. So now, who qualifies for all this? Looking back at the story of Jacob and Esau, why did Esau not get the blessing? We could say, well, God already, of course, knew it from the time they were born, who would get it. But I don't think that the chronological order of age played the main role here. I think Jacob, as a boy, was aligning himself for this to come one day. And Esau, again, was not aligning himself. He wasn't living his life so that the blessing was drawn to him. I think they made choices, both of them, that made it either worthy of a blessing or not. So if you look at Isaiah 55, verses 10 to 11, there in verse 10 it says, "For as the rain and the snow come down from heaven, and do not return there, but water the earth, making it bring forth and sprout, giving seed to the sower and bread to the eater." Then look at verse 11. "So shall my word be that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose, and shall succeed in the thing for which I sent it." So we see that a blessing will never contradict itself. And I've often wondered, and I used to when I was growing up, I used to think that if somebody has a major problem in his life, let's say if you know that somebody has an addiction or some other fault, then I should rather not bless that person because it may encourage them in the wrong. I have changed my view on that. God's blessing will never encourage evil. So I can liberally bless somebody, and my blessing will only rest on the part of that person that is worthy of it. The rest, it will bounce off, just like if you have if the hood of your truck is waxed, the water runs off. That's the same thing that will happen if we speak a blessing on somebody that is living an imperfect life, which to a degree we all do. That makes it so much more possible to bless my enemy, correct? Because my enemy will not be encouraged to do wrong just because of me blessing it. It will never encourage him in that. It will always just encourage the part that God has already taken in his life. In my life, I have especially one event that I always think back when I think about blessing. This was the week prior to Shirley and I's wedding. We went to my grandparents, John L. Barkman's. They were both alive at the time. And we wanted to personally visit them and invite them to our wedding. Back then, a lot of this was done by visitation, which the younger generation now finds hard to believe. But we would drive from house to house and we would invite all the people to the wedding one-on-one. It was a full week's job. So we come to my grandparents, and so we talk a bit, and my grandpa was already he had glaucoma or something in his eyes. He couldn't see very well, a bit like Isaac back in the day. But he gave us a very powerful blessing. He didn't lay hands on us, but to this day, it is still a blessing. And the verse that I would say is probably closest to that, I tried to look it up and see if there was a Bible verse that actually he quoted, but I don't think he really did. Maybe just did the essence of it. It's in Psalm 133, verse 3. It says, it is like the dew, and is referring to a previous conversation. It is like the dew of Hermon, which falls on the mountains of Zion. And what he was saying to us was, may his blessing cover you like a cloud of dew. We know that in the morning, the dew falls on everything. Whatever is not covered, it's wet in the morning. So that's what he was declaring over us. And we, my wife and I and our family, are still living under that blessing. It has never ceased. It's still going forth with full force. And I know it does not return void, like we just read. Romans 12, 14 and 15. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Now, what about cursing somebody? Are we as Christians called to curse somebody? Let's say if they have done us something wrong, can we just, so to say, blast them with curses? Let's look at Jude 1, verse 9. But when the archangel Michael, contending with the devil, was disputing about the body of Moses, he did not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment, but said, the Lord rebuke you. So who are we, people on this planet, that we think that we could wish somebody evil, when even we could say the chief of angels did not even want to touch that subject? He just said, okay, the Lord will deal with you. I'll just leave it in his hands, and he'll deal with you. How are we prone to take it into our own hands and try to get even here on this earth? It doesn't work. Now, we see an incident in the Bible where Jesus curses the fig tree, but I don't think that he modeled that to do on people. I think he wanted to show the disciples that he had all the power and that nothing would stop him. I don't think he meant to display, okay, now this is a model for you to do at every situation if you need to. I think that was just a lesson that he wanted them to see. If we look at the law of physics, we see various forces and how they interact with each other. And this I came across because blessing and cursing, how this would tie in according to physics. If we want to drive a nail, let's say if this stage would creak, and it doesn't creak, fortunately, because we put glue underneath, so I can move about, it doesn't creak. But if we want to drive a nail in the surface here, we would look for a combination, right? We would look for a 2 or 2.5 inch nail, and then we would look for a hammer accordingly that would be able to drive the nail. Have you ever thought of what would happen if the nail was heavier than the hammer? It would be very useless, right? If we would come here with a tiny toy hammer and we would try to drive a 5-inch nail, there would just be a lot of clanging there. Nothing would happen, right? It would maybe dent the plywood a bit, but the nail wouldn't go in. So in other words, you need a greater force than the object that has to be moved. That's the law of physics. If you want to move something, you have to have a greater force behind it to move the first object. So we could say the lighter conforms to the heavier. Now, who has the heavier object in their toolbox? We as Christians. Blessing is way stronger than cursing. So we could say we have the hammer. The nail has to conform to the hammer. So what happens when you curse? Okay, you are taking a tool from the enemy's toolbox and you are using it against another tool from that same toolbox. Then the question arises, why would I ever access the toolbox? If cursing is the enemy's thing, Why would I ever want to take a tool from that box and use it against the same? Let's just leave that toolbox alone and use blessing, which is way stronger in any case. So what Michael said, in essence, was, I don't have to deal with you. There is someone with the right size of hammer for you. That's what Michael was saying to the devil when the devil was trying to pick a fight with him. The devil was trying to get him into an argument with, where is the body of Moses? We know Moses died on the mountain, and there is no written funeral procession or anything about him in the Bible. We just know God buried him. And that's it. That's where he is to this day. Curses are like, or also judgments, they run side by side, are like boomerangs. I don't know if maybe some of you have been to Australia, but in Australia years ago they would use these boomerangs to kill birds while the birds were flying. They would throw them up and they would hit the bird, or if they didn't hit the bird, they would come right back to the sender. And that's what we do with, if we throw curses or judgment to somebody, be on the lookout. That is coming right back to you. It will hit you. Sometimes it takes a while. The wind might pick it up a little bit, but eventually you feel it. It comes back to you. Blessings, on the other hand, they're like a bowling ball. Some of you have been bowling, I'm sure. I love bowling. I would love, that's one thing that we should maybe eventually put up on the side here somewhere. Nice bowling alley would be very good. But some of the bowling balls, they are up to 16 pounds. And I always have to watch that I get my fingers out on time, because if you let go of one of those and your finger for some reason is too moist, it can hurt if it lets go too late. But that bowling ball, blessings are like that 16-pound ball. And you know how those balls, if you throw them on the lane, how sometimes you can see how they just gradually turn a little bit. There is basically, we could say, no resistance. That's the way blessings go. They just keep on going, and there is no resistance. They just keep on traveling. And that's what I told my grandparents' blessing. That's why it's still effective today, because there is no resistance. It just keeps on going and going. As long as I am aligning myself, then it keeps on going. So the only thing that can happen is we can hinder. We can get in the way of blessings to come. And that's like plugging a pipe. And one of those items is disobedience. If we are not obedient to Jesus and his commands, then it plugs the pipe. In my chicken barn, I have a feeding system that has a main auger coming into the barn, and then it has 2 drop tubes that feed the rows that actually feed the chickens. And as long as the pipes that drop the feed are open, feed gets into the small hoppers. And I have a little brace across the top of the hopper. And if I'm not careful, if I have that pipe on that brace, it tends to fill up. And guess what happens? The chicks don't get feed. The supply is all there, but the chickens don't get their feed. So we have to, in my barn, we have to position the pipe so that the feed can flow out of that pipe. So the supply motor does not quit because of a clogged pipe unless it has a switch, and my system has a switch on top. Once it fills up, then it will shut off the motor. But let's say if we would take that switch away, the motor would continue to feed. We could say God is that main supply motor. He will continue to feed blessings to me. The only problem that can be is if I plug the pipe, then I will think there is none. But they're continually coming. I just have the pipe shut, so I can't feel them, I can't recognize them, but they're there. And guess what happens if I block them? If you're near to me, you may get them. I may miss them, but you may get them because they will start spilling over because the auger is going. It will keep on supplying. So it's just like blessings work like this. Let's say if this was our life and this mic was the blesser or God's provision to me, if I would hold it like this, it would drop beside me. It wouldn't affect me. It can't. It is there, but I don't realize it. But if I do it like this, then it will continually replenish my need for everything that I have in my life. It will continue to drop into my life, and I will enjoy my life. It will be full of blessing. So the key thing is that we're aligned for it. If we're aligned for blessing, we will enjoy them continually. If we feel that our life is dry and it's barren and there's no good things coming out of it, then make sure you're not maybe a few inches off. Feel your way through prayer and find out if the flow is there. You just have to make sure that your cup or your receiver is positioned for you to receive it. And one of the main things that will quickly remove your receiver is if you have an offense towards somebody. That's just like a jerk, and blessings are not, you don't feel them anymore. That's just, you're consumed with someone's wrong. So that will quickly take away your blessings. So the question is, can someone steal your blessing? No. Nobody can steal my blessings because I control where my receiver is. It's not you that controls it. You can do all kinds of things to me, but it's my choice that will change that. It's not your choice. Remember the law of physics. In that case, I have the heavier object. You can tap on my receiver, but I will have to move it. It's not you that will do it. If you try to offend me, that's just like a tap with a little tiny hammer. My big receiver, it will just bang a little bit. Unless I allow myself with a little tap to be moved to the side, and God will start pouring it on others that was meant for me. So you can try, but you won't succeed unless I agree that you can succeed. So we need to be on the lookout for blessings. And the very same thing that happens to one person and he takes it as a blessing can come to another person and he counts it as a curse or as a disaster. I remember years ago there was a fire in the Midwestern or kind of in the northwestern part of the US, the Yellowstone Park fire. I think most of you probably read it back then in the news. But there was a great fire, and it destroyed about 1/3 of the national park, or I could say it burnt 1/3 of the park. It was considered a very, very great loss till a few years after. What had happened was, with time, with years and years of protecting the park from fire, there was a buildup of material, a deep layer of pine needles and dead branches, dead trees. It just piled up. So a particularly dry year, which was 1988, there were exceptionally many lightning strikes. They say there were about 42 fires started by lightning in that one event. And those strikes basically all survived, and you know how fire is. If there's a spark, if sparks fly and it's dry matter where it flies on, each individual fire eventually becomes one big fire. So that's what happened in the park. There was just no stopping. Green trees started to burn. People thought this would take, it was a generation or more of trees just gone. But then as scientists and environmentalists looked at the same situation a year or two later, they saw that the fire actually was beneficial. It had allowed the seeds of trees to mature and to burst open, that only burst open with heat. The dead matter on the ground had prevented the seeds from penetrating into the ground. Now with the fire, the seeds that were stored, and who knows how long, they started to grow. In the matter of a few years, there was lots of small green trees all over. And there was new grass for the animals to eat. So looking back now, most people agree that the fire of 1988 was actually a benefit. But at the time, it looked like this may be a curse to Yellowstone. And that's the same thing in our life. We meet with situations that initially we think, oh, this is, who's causing this? Like, why is this coming to me? This is something very negative. Once we're through it, we can look back and see, okay, this is what actually came out of it. And that is where I want to encourage us. Whatever happens to us, always look for what good can come out of it. Because we miss so much. And I have a situation like that at home. It's still pending. We're still finding out the results tomorrow. I was topping the oil of my mower yesterday, and it has, I don't know if it leaks or if it burns oil, but it's been doing that for a while. I occasionally have to fill the oil. So I had added oil, and I didn't have a lot of oil left in my quart, so I just filled that little third in the quart, and I thought I put back the cover, and I asked one of my sons to mow. So later, when it's almost finished mowing, he says that there's oil on different areas of the mower, which there shouldn't be. So apparently I forgot to put back the cap. And it has to run on oil pressure. So yeah, for me, it's an ongoing decision for me how the results will be tomorrow, but I trust God is in control, and I trust that it will all be okay. If it's not, I will still choose to take the best out of that situation. I will not let that little hammer do anything on me. There is a story which I want to share here in closing. It says, "The man whispered, 'God, speak to me.' And a meadowlark sang, but the man did not hear. So the man yelled, 'God, speak to me.' And the thunder rolled across the sky. But the man did not listen. The man looked around and said, 'God, let me see you.' And a star shone brightly, but the man did not notice. And the man shouted, 'God, show me a miracle.' And a life was born. But the man did not know. So the man cried out in despair, 'Touch me, God, and let me know that you are here.' Whereupon God reached down and touched the man, but the man brushed the butterfly away. So God wanted to physically touch the man and sent the butterfly to sit on his nose or wherever, and the man still didn't notice. So how many times did God try to speak? It was 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 times God was speaking, and the man didn't understand. That, again, is example of blessings. There may be blessings coming our way, and we just brush them aside. And I would much rather attribute a lot more to God. In other words, some people are leery of calling everything a divine blessing, or, they would say, well, why call everything so spiritual when it's just nature happening, right? But no, if I err on any side, I would rather err with giving God more credit than, if it's natural, He is in control of the universe, so be it natural. He is still the author of it. So I want to live my life with seeing all the small things in life and seeing that these are actually God's stops And the more we are in tune with His blessing, the more we are in tune with each other. The more that people that do something for us, we will recognize it. And one of them being the example that we saw in the skit about the moms in the home. We can easily take it for granted because life goes on one day at a time, it ticks away, and sometimes the doings of life become normal. And we fail to see the awe and the wonder of small things that are actually very unique of how we are able to enjoy life. So if we get too busy or if we get sidetracked with the struggles of life, we will miss it, just like with this poem that I read, the story. The man had a lot of reason to be reminded that God was coming to him, and yet he missed it again and again because it was packaged in a different wrapper than he thought. And so often when we pray, we have a vivid idea how this will come about. But God is very good at giving us the package in a little different packaging than we have prayed for. Why does He do that? He wants us to know that we are not in charge, is one thing. And also, He wants us to know that it was Him sending it to us. If it was always in the package that we had thought, we would start to feel that we are in control. And He doesn't want that. He cannot move or shape somebody that is feeling they have it together or they're in control, because God wants to be in charge. He doesn't want us to have the idea that I've got it made and I will pray and I will get this thing going. There's another story that I wanted to share. There were two guys, and this is definitely not a story that actually happened because it works out too okay. Once a story is, everything works well, then you know something is probably not quite so. But there were two guys that were shipwrecked, two close friends. They were shipwrecked and they were on this island by themselves, all alone. So they immediately knew that they would have some very immediate needs. One was food. So they decided they would start to pray for stuff, and they would see whose prayer was stronger. So they divided the island into two, and they each had their zone. One was on one side of the island, the other guy was on the other side. So they both would pray for the things that they needed. So they immediately both prayed for food. And I don't think they had communication in between, but they also prayed for company. So the one guy, we could say the guy one, he prays for food and he sees a tree that has fruit. So that's an answer to prayer. So he can eat. The next day, he gets lonely, so he prays for a companion. And another shipwreck happens, and the only person to survive is a lady. So the lady comes to the shore and he has a companion. And so it goes. The next day it was a house and whatever, so we know it's made up, but it brings out a moral. So then eventually the first guy that has all these things, the wife, the house, and different things already accumulated, he decides to leave the island. But then he doesn't even check with the other guy because he's well off. He figures, let the guy just be there. But then God reminds him, and God says to him, you know what? Whose prayers were answered? Well, mine were, because I got all this, right? And he didn't. He was still alone. He didn't have no companion yet. Then God says to him, no, it's actually the other way around. All the time you were getting these blessings, it was Him praying for you. So there we see that we sometimes underestimate what happens with wishing somebody good or praying for people or blessing someone. We can send unmarked blessings to people that they will never realize where this comes from. And we can do that liberally one to another. So what I want us to do now, and I'm not sure if we can put on some music, but what I'd like to do is two things that we want to do today. One is we first want to check our hearts and see if there is somebody that we have allowed to bang against our receiver and that has created a frequency that we lost the frequency of heaven, that we are blocked. Because I know God is continually pouring to each one of you, no doubt to that. So if we can first do that, pray and find if we have any blockages, whether it's unforgiveness to somebody or if sometimes it's simply just the busyness of life. We tend to get clogged with cares and with stresses over time. It just wears at us. Then the next thing we want to do is we want to practice this one to another. I would like if we could all find somebody close to us and we could join in prayer for them and bless someone that is in your area. If you want them to succeed and you mean it so, why don't we practice this on one another? I'm sure there's good things that can result from us doing that.
Thank you for listening to this message from Fusion Church. You can listen to more messages online at fusionbz.com.